studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Samantha Wright, filling in for Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. Homeowners insurance is getting more expensive and harder to keep in our region. One of the most important causes is climate change-fueled wildfires. Recent federal data shows non-renewals spiraling in many places and annual premiums jumping hundreds of dollars from one year to the next. For example, in Idaho's Boise County, non-renewal rates nearly tripled in 5 years. In the first of our insurance crisis series, the Mountain West News Bureau's Murphy Woodhouse takes us to a rural Idaho community that's been particularly hard hit.
It's an unseasonably warm spring weekday in the rural Idaho town of Crouch, an hour drive north of the capital, Boise. Cars pass slowly by the Dirty Shame, a popular restaurant and watering hole. The Middle Fork of the Payette River meanders a few hundred yards away, just shy of where it meets the main branch in the stunning Garden Valley. High and thick mountains rise many hundreds of feet in all directions.
What a beautiful day to come to Crouch.
Yeah.
I'm there to meet Sandy Nabafeld and her husband Dave, both in their 70s. Sitting in the shade on the bar's front porch, Sandy, a former Boise nurse, explains they bought a lot nearby in 1990.
Thinking that after we retired, we would come up to Garden Valley and make that our home.
For several decades, their property was insured without issue. But then, 5 or so years ago, they received notice that their policy would not be renewed.
It was shocking. It was like, oh my God, all of our investment here in this house. What are we going to do, Dave?
The first emotion is anger. So why can they do this to us, We paid our bills on time for years and years.
They say their insurer told them the decision was based on wildfire danger in the area. With the help of an independent agent, the couple found a new policy, this time with auto owners. But in June 2023, another letter came.
You are hereby notified in accordance with the terms and conditions of the above referenced policy that the insurance provided by such policy will cease.
The letter explained auto owners was also trying to reduce its wildfire exposure. A company spokesperson did not respond to a list of questions regarding the cancellation.
I wanted to deck somebody.
For a second time, they turned to their insurance agent and found a third policy. But after 2 non-renewals...
I'm afraid, that I'm going to get a third letter.
More and more such letters have been arriving in surrounding Boise County. In 2023, nearly 1 in 30 policies were not renewed, the highest rate in the state, and triple what it was in 2018. Colorado, Montana, New Mexico, and Wyoming all have multiple counties whose rates at least tripled. That's according to data released by the U.S. Senate late last year as a part of a probe into what it called the climate change-driven homeowners insurance crisis. A major recent analysis from the U.S. Treasury's Federal Insurance Office found that the West had some of the sharpest premium jumps. The FIO identified several key factors behind these trends, including rising rebuilding costs, continued development in high-risk areas, and increasingly common and severe climate-fueled disasters like wildfires.
They should be very worried.
And not just rural Boise County residents like Sandy and Dave, says Idaho Insurance Commissioner Dean Cameron.
We're hearing those kind of complaints from all over.
And if nothing is done to address it,
it will continue to spiral in the wrong direction. And the spiral gets wider and wider.
The retirement home that Sandy and Dave dreamed into being is a stately log structure, a short walk from the Terrace Lakes Resort's 18th fairway. Dave built it with the help of 2 others.
How many hours did you personally put into building this home?
Thousands.
The retired Boise firefighter has taken a number of measures to keep the home safe. It has a metal roof, and drain rock forms a non-combustible ring around the structure. There's a fire hydrant up front.
And there's another one on the back.
Another one in the back.
I got 100 pounds of pressure.
Insurance or no, the couple intends to live out their remaining years in the home.
You have to prepare yourself.
And if the flaming front ever comes, he says he's ready to do whatever it takes to protect it. For the Mountain West News Bureau, I'm Murphy Woodhouse.
And in the second part of our series, the Mountain West News Bureau's Rachel Cohen shares how state leaders are trying and struggling to get reforms passed.
A stone's throw from the Colorado Capitol early this spring, Michael Conway was preparing to make a case to lawmakers. He's the state's insurance commissioner.
Something bad has probably happened in your life if you know what the state insurance commissioner is.
Conway ensures companies providing car, health, and home insurance are following the law. It's an under-the-radar but vital role, especially as disasters like hailstorms and wildfires hit our region more often. More than 3 years ago, over 1,000 homes burned in the Marshall Fire, the most destructive in state history. And since, Colorado's home insurance market has never been more shaky.
We have insurance companies that are making decisions to not write throughout the entire state like they were previously.
Homeowners are freaking out.
Douglas Heller is an advocate with the Consumer Federation of America. He says people all over the West are paying more for insurance if they can find coverage at all.
So they're calling up their lawmakers. They're calling anybody who will listen and saying, what do I do?
Some state leaders are hearing their calls. A Mountain West News Bureau review found at least 13 bills introduced in 7 state houses in our region this year that try to tackle this issue. Some would clarify how insurance companies assess risk, and others would make communities more resilient to blazes. Conway's first fix came a few years back when Colorado set up a state-backed insurance safety net for people turned down by private companies.
If you can't find insurance coverage, you don't have the ability to buy or sell a home.
The program went live last month and people are signing up, but Conway says it's not enough.
Commissioner Conway, welcome to the House Finance Committee. Please state your name, who you're representing. You have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Lindstedt and members of the Finance
So
Committee.
he went back to lawmakers with an idea for how to make insurance more affordable. The big bill, as he calls it, is complicated. One part would set up a state fund to absorb one of the fastest growing costs for insurance companies, the insurance they buy on the global market.
We want to take on part of the risk of the wildfire events that happen in Colorado and offset those insurance costs for our homeowners.
And he had the support of Governor Jared Polis in this year's State of the State address.
Just as Lord of the Ring fans know that one does not simply walk into Mordor, one does not simply fix homeowners insurance. But we need to start somewhere, and we need to start now.
But some state leaders worry too much regulation could scare off insurers. Carol Walker with the Rocky Mountain Insurance Association says it's not an empty threat.
We want to stay in your state. We want to sell insurance. But if we have to gamble on us being able to pay out claims, that's not a risk that we can take.
Her group initially opposed the bill in Colorado, and it ended up dying. Lawmakers were wary that the plan required homeowners to pay an upfront fee before they'd see any potential savings. Senator Judy Amable was one of the bill sponsors and called the defeat a disappointment.
We're now opting to do nothing about a runaway freight train that is going to hit all of us.
But even over in Idaho, where Conway's counterpart tried a more conservative approach, they also came up short.
Unfortunately, we've got some work to do with the legislature.
Idaho Insurance Commissioner Dean Cameron proposed a grant fund to help residents prevent their properties from burning in wildfires. But the proposal failed. So did a resolution just to study the issue.
We have to help them understand why this isn't an expansion of government.
Some efforts did have success in Mountain West state houses. A separate bill in Colorado could give property owners more credit for wildfire mitigation. Another in New Mexico paves the way to certify properties as wildfire prepared. But the majority of measures we reviewed failed. Conway and Cameron say they'll be back in front of lawmakers next year, worrying that without solutions, the problem will just get worse. For the Mountain West News Bureau, I'm Rachel Cohen.
Let's get back with Mountain West News Bureau reporter Murphy Woodhouse. We're talking about a home insurance crisis, a fascinating story. And Murphy, how are you, first of all? How's it going?
I am doing all right as long as I don't, worry about the many existential crises that we're currently facing.
Right. Well, you've been digging into this along with Rachel. And as we heard from Rachel, many legislative efforts in the West were not successful, including right here in Idaho. So what do the next steps look like?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, the problem certainly hasn't been solved. So I fully expect this issue to keep coming up. And, in Rachel's story, we just heard that it is the intention of both Commissioner Conway in Colorado and then here in Idaho, our Commissioner, Dean Cameron, they both intend to bring legislation again next year dealing with these issues. And then actually in Colorado, we do have an update this week where HB 1182 was just signed into law by Governor Jared Polis. So that was one of 2 major pieces of legislation, one of which, of course, failed, as Rachel reported. But one was approved and now is signed. And it is intended to make insurance policies much more transparent to both the public and policymakers when it comes to how they're taking into consideration climate risk factors in pricing and underwriting. And then here in Idaho, a major next step that is, underway right now and in some ways kind of wrapping up is the mandatory data call that Cameron's office has made to insurers in the state. So there's obviously a lot of federal data out there, much of which is what we used for reporting this story. But Cameron says that there is distrust among state legislators of federal data. And he thinks that if they were to have information, that came directly from this state level effort, that might have more legitimacy before the legislature. And so, he also says that he kind of wishes he had done that before this year's session. So let's hear from him real quick.
They were hearing complaints as well as we were, maybe not as much as we would have liked, but they've seen most of our evidence as being anecdotal.
So the data that they're asking for from all insurers and operating in the state, it includes information on non-renewals and premiums and other key data points. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing what they come up with once they've actually crunched those likely voluminous numbers and how much or even whether that picture differs much from the already quite disturbing picture being painted by the federal data from the U.S. Senate Budget Committee and the Federal Insurance Office. But the short of it is, I think we're only going to be hearing more and more about the insurance crisis moving forward. And I'm certainly not holding my breath for this complex, thorny, and deeply consequential problem to solve itself.
Well, definitely a lot of moving parts. What could some of the consequences be if this continues to play out? What could this mean for, say, real estate markets?
Yeah, I really do think that you've hit on one of the key, if not the key, knock-on effect of all of this. So, insurance first and foremost is, it is something that gives you the relief of knowing that if a disaster occurs, you'll be able to rebuild in some fashion. But real estate markets also rest on functioning insurance markets. Most homes are purchased with debt. Very few of us have just, $500,000 in cash or other liquid assets lying around to just pick up a home.
Right.
And mortgage lenders, of course, typically require homes to be insured because the home also serves as the collateral for the debt. And a source recently told me for some recent reporting, quote, once areas become or are deemed uninsurable, then they become unmortgageable. Ooh. So the report from the U.S. Senate Budget Committee on the issue had some quite dire language about this dynamic, and that came out late last year. And this is just a section from the written story of the series. Without strong action on climate change, the report warned, extreme disasters will continue to drive premiums higher and make policies harder to keep and obtain. That, it argued, could lead to, and this is the key thing, a, quote, collapse in property values with the potential to trigger a full-scale financial crisis similar to what occurred in 2008. I think we'll all basically recall the enormity of 2008. But I'd also like to just kind of make this all very real and specific. So as a part of my reporting in Boise County, I also spoke with Kip McBean, and he's a very interesting person for a number of reasons, including the fact that he basically spent his entire career in insurance and retired last year, literally as Boise State University's risk and insurance manager. And despite that, he really wasn't thinking about insurance when he bought his retirement home in 2018. Annual premiums were about $1,000 at the time. But then, and mostly in the last couple of years, they ballooned to roughly $2,000. He's kept that in check to some degree by getting a skimpier policy. But he also listened in to part of my conversation with Sandy and Dave and is now worried himself about the possibility of a policy cancellation. So let's hear from him.
Well, it's crossed my mind actually about selling. Yeah, I hate to say it, but it's such a beautiful area and everything else. And if I got the cancellation letter and I couldn't get insurance anymore, then I would try to sell.
Wow.
You can hear the anxiety and uncertainty in his voice, and I think that's very easy to understand because he was listening as Sandy and Dave were recounting what this has meant for them, and so. I think this anxiety is very easy to imagine, and it kind of raises these questions. Is living in paradise worth the regular worry of whether you're going to have insurance next year? I think one of the key issues at play here is that, mortgages are issued for many years, 15, 20, 30 years, but insurance policies are typically just a single year. And I also just think it's worth pointing out, like with these sources, Dave
is a retired firefighter, obviously very informed about, some of these risks. And then Kip is a former insurance guy. And even these folks have felt overwhelmed by this situation. I also think it's worth sharing, Kip had a reaction to the Idaho legislature's failure to pass anything on this front. He said he was disappointed, of course, but he's also worried about what this fire season could bring. And we already have indications that it could be a quite active one. And he also worries about, further waves of cancellations. And something that he shared with me that's just kind of stuck in my head. He told me, quote, "God forbid it takes a catastrophe for them to wake up and say, well, looking back, we should have done something more."
Well, and there are a lot of numbers here and a lot of technical things, but you can really hear it in his voice. I mean, for most people who own a house, their house is their home, and you can really hear it in his voice that he doesn't want to lose or have to give up his home. And I think, when you drill down into it, you're talking about real people and real consequences. A lot of your reporting was based in Boise County, that's just north of Ada County, because it had the highest policy cancellation rate in Idaho in 2023. But what about the rest of the state? And what about the rest of the West? What do they look like?
Yeah, so I mean, Boise County jumped out for exactly the reason that you suggested there, and it is facing a very serious situation. But it's, as Dean Cameron himself emphasized, they're hearing stories like this from every corner of the state and not just from rural areas. So right next to Boise County is Blaine County, which I think people will know more as home to world famous Sun Valley. So their 2023 rate was slightly lower than Boise County's, 2.8%. But that is up from just 0.54% in 2018, which means that it more than quintupled in just 5 years. Teton County, which is just across the border in Wyoming that includes Jackson, another very famous resort community, their rate went from 0.25% in 2018 to 3.74%. So I don't know the actual word for that sort of increase, but we're going to be calling that a 15-tupling here. Wow. So I would encourage people to check out the interactive map that we built for the story, because I think it pretty neatly summarizes the situation. It allows you to toggle between 2018 and 2023 and visualizes the non-renewal rates. And what you see is a region painted in mostly light reds in 2018, getting darker, and in some cases much darker in many places by 2023. There are certainly exceptions. There are hundreds of counties across the West. Arizona had counties that had where many counties actually declined during this period. But I think the general trend is pretty clear. Insurance is getting more expensive, and it's getting harder to keep.
Well, and, when we're talking about, as you said, possibly a very heavy fire season, it's pretty scary. You mentioned the interactive map. It's in there, and you can check it out. Have you had response to this story since releasing it?
Absolutely. So, like with a story like this, I think I and many reporters are often most worried about kind of how the key sources feel about it. These are people talking about very stressful things, and they have a lot on the line. So I was very relieved to hear that Sandy, Dave, and Kip felt pretty well represented by the stories. But I also shared the story with the Garden Valley Community Facebook group, where I did a lot of my initial reporting and how I actually came to meet Sandy. So these weren't on the record conversations, so I'll just kind of summarize. But what I can very safely say is that there is just a lot of anger in Boise County, multiple people referring to homeowners insurance as a scam or even an extortion racket. Several shared the very serious issues that they're confronting, recent non-renewals and current, like literally there are people there right now looking for insurance policies and cannot find them. Significant year-to-year rate hikes for people on fixed incomes. I mean, I won't mention the exact figure, but I mean hundreds of dollars. And if if your income is fixed, that's a major expense over the course of a year. So this is a very serious situation that state leaders have so far failed to take significant action on. And I'm really not sure, given what I've heard, that these leaders really appreciate the magnitude of anger and anxiety being generated by this. But I really don't think that should be surprising at all. So, I mean, as with Dave and Sandy, I mean, we're ultimately talking about existential threats to much of the wealth that these people have built up over their lives.
Right. And then that home issue again. Okay, so much of the series with you and Rachel focused on insurance and insurance policy reform, but we know the climate is changing. What role did that play in all of this and what you found out?
Yeah, so, climate change is very much the elephant in the room here. So in my reporting on insurance, I've been reporting pretty regularly on it for at least a year at this point. I've spoken several times with Dave Jones, who was the previous California insurance commissioner, and he regularly makes the point that the insurance crisis should be thought of principally as a symptom of the larger climate crisis, that climate change, not insurance policy, is really in the driver's seat here. And he is just absolutely not alone in thinking like this. For the series, Rachel and I also spoke with Ben Keyes, who's a real estate and finance professor at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School. And he and his co-author very cleverly were able to produce some of the first fine-grained nationwide data on rising insurance premiums. And when I reported on that research last summer, he shared a quote with me that really just kind of became a seed. He said, quote, "The place where most homeowners are going to feel climate change first is in their insurance premiums." And when we spoke to him more recently, he said that he certainly thinks that there are meaningful reforms that can help communities and insurance become more resilient. But he also said this:
as the world gets hotter, we're going to see more wildfires, more severe storms, more hail. All of the things are going to be getting worse. And insurers are going to pass those costs on to homeowners. So yes, the first thing should be loudly advocating for more climate action.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I think it's just very important to remember that when we're talking about the homeowners insurance crisis, it is just a symptom. And climate change is still largely untreated disease here.
Oh, wow. Well, I want to thank you, Murphy. This has been great. And I know you're going to keep on top of this.
And until it's solved, it's going to keep being a very major issue.
It is. We've been talking to Murphy Woodhouse. He and Rachel Cohen put together a great series. A home insurance crisis is building in the West. We're going to link back to it on our website, boisestatepublicradio.org. Thanks to Murphy Woodhouse and Rachel Cohen of the Mountain West News Bureau. Really appreciate your time, Murphy.
Really appreciate the interest.
This is the Idaho Matters podcast. I'm Gemma Gaudette.